Hello everyone. When I posted my last video, I expected that like maybe my mom would watch it and a couple other people. So color me shocked that when I posted it, it really actually did get a reaction. There were about 1,000 views as of now and over 50 comments. Admittedly, some of those comments much more helpful than others. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that there are plenty of people in that comment section posting either very self-serving or completely irrelevant and unhelpful advice. However, either way, it's really exciting to get such a big response, and that's just a few comments. The overwhelming majority of comments seem to be very positive and receptive to the video that I posted. I had a lot of people saying that they related to this, that they found the video down to earth, that it resonated with them. There were so many people really putting effort into posting insightful advice, sharing their own life experiences, and I read them all. I still read them all. I find it really interesting, and I'm trying to be as active as possible and respond to all of the comments, even the comments that give what I consider unhelpful criticism. Try to respond to them and explain why. Because I think it's really great that we have a discussion going, and I feel very honored to be able to sort of facilitate that. Now, if you'd like to just skip to the meat of this video, then there should be chapters in the description and on the progress bar, so feel free to skip to the next one if you're not interested in seeing me respond to some of the things that people left on the last video. However, I am going to take a moment to do that because I feel the need to. So, first of all, there you go. You can stop complaining. Winnie the Pooh's face has officially been erased. You can come out of hiding. Yes, I know, very absurd for a 20-year-old to have PNGs of fictional characters on his bedsheets. Well, the fact of the matter is, I have plenty of bedsheets and decorations that are plain or just have patterns or solid colors, but I find that tremendously boring. A lot of this stuff is left over from when I was a kid, and I just never felt the need to replace it because why would I? I still like most of these franchises. I still watch Spider-Man movies, I still play Mario games, I still like Winnie the Pooh. I grew up with it, and it's something I cherish as a sacred part of my childhood. But many people saw these giant glaring signs in bright red lettering that spell out, hey, this person has autism, and told me that it was distracting. A significant amount of people just told me, change the way you decorate your room, change the way you dress. One person said, change your haircut. Take note, this is what bad advice looks like. If you have to pretend to be someone else and take on a style that doesn't represent who you are and what you like, then you're not doing it right, and the friends you make aren't going to be people who really like you or relate to you. They're just going to be people who relate to the false image you've built up of yourself. I understand it's a little bit weird that I'm wearing gloves indoors, but my hands do in fact just get that cold that easily. I'm the type of person that's far more comfortable wearing socks than I am not wearing socks, and the same goes for my hands. What can I say? There's a line in Jeanette McCurdy's memoir that says something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, something along the lines of, why do we need to make curtains or bed sheets fun? These items are functional, they're not fun, they don't need to be interesting or exciting. And it's interesting because I have the opposite viewpoint of that. If given the choice between a blanket with a picture on it and a blanket without a picture on it, I will almost universally pick the one with a picture on it, especially if it's a picture of something that I'm interested in. I suppose it really boils down to the age-old saying, different strokes, different folks, right? Maybe sleeping on a PNG of Mario's face at my age is a little bit goofy, perhaps even a little bit childish, but I don't really see how it devalues me as a person, so it's not something I really intend to change about myself. If I had somebody living with me sleeping in the same bed as me that had a problem with it, then I'd at least understand why it was an issue, but I don't, so why bother? Well, a lot of people were also eager to point out that while I was listing off advice that people will give you that often doesn't help, I missed one. And perhaps coincidentally, many of the unhelpful comments also suggested this same piece of advice. And this piece of advice is essentially, get a hobby. Find a hobby, find people that are interested in your hobby, and that will draw people towards you. And on paper, this is not bad advice. I can very easily see how this advice would be given in good faith, and I can very easily see how this advice could be successful for some people. If you can find something that you enjoy doing and share it with others and indulge in it with others, then that sounds like a fantastic way to make friends. In fact, I'm sure many of the greatest friendships and connections have been built off of that sort of thing. But it's not advice that universally applies, and I'm going to tell you why, for a few reasons. Now, reason number one is that different people are going to have different hobbies, and some people are just going to end up having hobbies that are unimaginably niche and don't really draw others towards you, maybe just by their very nature, maybe just by how niche they are. And I know that those types of people exist because you're looking at one. Frankly, I have more hobbies than I could possibly know what to do with, and I could talk at hours length about just about any of them. And this has surely provided me with a fun social interaction or two between me and people who already knew me, but it's never really drawn people towards me. Let me give you an example. One thing I mentioned offhandedly in my last video is that I collect almost absurdly obsolete technology. Now there's a few visible examples of that in this room. Of course, you can see a Commodore back there. I'm not sure how many of you even know what a Commodore is. You can see my tube TV here. I have many more tube TVs in my living room, which is far less messy than this bedroom is. And then there's also my laptop, which, yes, this is my actual laptop. Yes, it is running Windows 7, and I don't care what anyone says, this is the best laptop on the planet, even if just for this reason. This handle is so helpful. The area of old technology that I'm most interested in fact, is old cell phones, which is something I bet you haven't met many people with that hobby. And I'll give you the very brief history of how I got into that, which totally isn't just because it will be a really funny thing to put in the title. Now, I'm sure most of you watching this probably have a smartphone. Some of you are probably watching this video on your smartphone. And to those of you who have a smartphone and enjoy it, good for you. Nothing against that. I hate smartphones. I despise smartphones. I don't like them. I think they're weird to touch. I think they're addictive as hell. I think they're more a burden than they are a help. My biggest problem with smartphones is that I feel it's a product that has control over the consumer rather than the consumer having control over the product. And when I was in high school, my dad kept getting these new phone plans and obligating me to get a cell phone, saying, Jamie, you gotta get a cell phone. And I would always say, I don't want a cell phone. Why do I have to get a cell phone? I'm perfectly happy with my tablet. I would get these phones and they would be these heavy giant slabs of glass that I, a person with ADHD, was supposed to take around with me everywhere, and then surprise, surprise, they'd break. And my dad would get mad at me, Jamie, why'd you break your phone that I didn't want in the first place? Well, one day I got fed up with it, and half expecting it was just a joke, queued up a page on eBay and said, hey Dad, why don't you spend $40 and just get me a flip phone? That won't break. And here it is. I've had this since I was in high school, which we're talking about 2020-ish. And I love this phone. I adore this phone. It has served my every need. I can make calls on it. I can save my contacts to it. I can very tumultuously text people on it. It has Bluetooth. I have all my music on this phone. And I can put peekapoos on it. Look at that. Isn't that a fantastic way to carry my childhood around with me? And this is a phone that's not going to break. Similar to the laptop, this is a rugged phone. This is a phone that is built specifically with the idea in mind that you can drop it, throw it, even punch it, and pretty much nothing will happen. And I know this because it's happened so many times. I'm a very clumsy person, and I've dropped this on raw cement many times. One time when I was in high school, I dropped it down the stairwell. Not the stairs, the stairwell, from the top to the floor. And there is still not a single scratch on either of its screens. I love this phone. No doom scrolling, and it has this convenient flip feature, which is not only satisfying to do, but allows it to go perfectly into my pocket for ease of access. And at first that's really all it was. It was just a practical thing. It wasn't really because I was interested in old flip phones, but naturally using and having a flip phone for years, it eventually sort of became something that was interesting to me. One thing I always wanted to do was put games on this phone, and I could never figure out how. You try to put a jar file on this thing, and it just doesn't read it properly. And the most frustrating thing is that I know it's capable of playing those games, because back in the day you could install them. But obviously now that all of those services are shut down, and they didn't put a way to sideload them onto this thing, you're pretty much in the dark as far as that goes. So somebody on Reddit recommended me a different old Samsung phone that they were able to put games on, and I went on eBay and I bought it. And it's right here. It's a slider phone. It has this slide-out keyboard. Reddit person was lying. It unfortunately can't sideload Java games either. But that started a snowball effect. I started becoming interested in older phones for a variety of reasons. I like old technology, as I mentioned. I like technology with tactile feedback. I think that these old phones are usually very unique from each other and have a lot of character. And I'll save the whole elaborate story for another day because I'm sure it could be a whole video on its own, but the end result is I now have 6 of these phones, and yes, I carry all of them with me at all times. I have these 2 Samsungs, I have these 2 Blackberries, a Curve 8330 and a Bold 9000, which were released in 2007 and 2008 respectively, despite looking vastly different aesthetically. And I have 2 LG phones. There's this one, which is my favorite phone, by far. Look at how pretty this thing is. This looks amazing in the dark, by the way. This camera really doesn't do it justice, but the other thing is, I finally was able to sideload games onto this one. Yes, it's not entirely ideal since you have to hold it this way to play the games, even though it's obviously meant to be held this way, but I'm really just happy I can play them at all. And then the other LG phone I have, which has a very, very interesting and elaborate story behind it, is this one. At first it looks like a standard brick phone, but then you turn it around, and bam, it has this elaborate camera. You can even open and close the little eye, the little lens that it has. It's upside down. But that's not all, no. It also opens up. Like that. It is basically a second secret phone inside the phone. I love the form factor of this thing. Be sure to let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in a separate video where I specifically talk about my old phones, what they all do, because I do have unique uses for each of them. And particularly how I Frankensteined this one together out of 3 that didn't work properly, because that's an interesting story. I'm using this as an example to explain the sorts of hobbies I have and how I get into them, because this is usually what happens. It starts with something small, like the flip phone, usually something that's just for practical purposes, and then it slowly turns into, snowballs into something that I'm really interested in. And I learn about the history of it, and I become involved in it. I want to own things that have to do with it. The way that I got into gaming was very similar. It started because I was nostalgic about playing Super Mario 64 on my mom's Wii when I was a kid. Then my dad installed an emulator, then I started buying Famiclones. I eventually got a Wii for my birthday and figured out how to sideload games onto it with a hard drive, and now I have a massive collection of games spanning from the NES all the way to the Switch. Or game development, which is another thing I've done, in case you're unaware. It started because I wanted to play Mario Maker, but at the time I didn't have any consoles that played Mario Maker. So I opened Scratch in the browser of my dad's work computer, because I was at his work at the time, and I decided I'll just make my own Mario Maker. Which was actually a really good way to learn how to develop games, because I was able to start with something that I was already familiar with, and in trying to recreate mechanics that already existed while just being able to rip music and sprites that other people had already created for me, I sort of gradually learned through trial and error how these things work and developed the capability to make things for myself. I could go on and on about other hobbies I have and how I've gotten them. All of these stories have much larger stories behind them. I'm just giving you the footnotes version because I don't want this video to be too long. I'm sure you're thinking, well, great, you have all these hobbies. Why don't you use these hobbies to find other people and make friends? Much easier said than done. Of course, this is the elephant in the room. If you have a really niche hobby, like, for example, these old phones, this is not a hobby that most people would have or be particularly interested in. If I go up to somebody on the street or on the internet and say, do you prefer Nokias or Blackberries? What's your favorite J2ME game? They'll probably look at me like I'm a crazy person and say, what the hell are you on about? So that's one issue with that, right? Sometimes you just have niche hobbies that don't really draw in other people. But then you can even have a hobby that's a little bit more mainstream, I guess, like gaming. I'm interested in gaming. I don't really find the time to game so much these days, but I have many, many games, like I said, spanning all the way from the 80s and late 70s all the way to now. And I'm pretty much a walking encyclopedia of useless video game information. I know all about the history of the medium. I could rant for hours about Satoru Iwata and his influence on the industry. I have a comprehensive list of games in my head that I really, really like, and I could go on about them and their history. Albeit even then, the games I tend to like are usually pretty niche games for pretty niche consoles. As you can imagine by the whole obsolete technology thing, a lot of the consoles I prefer are very old consoles like the GBA, and a lot of the games I like are very niche games like random license games that are way better than they have any right to be. Seriously, GBA licensed game soundtracks, there is nothing like that. The Spider-Man 2 GBA soundtrack is one of the best video game soundtracks I've ever heard. And even with all of this being the case, I don't very often make friends based on being into gaming. How would I do that? If you go on the internet and look up, gaming friends, looking for friends in gaming, right? You're going to find a wide variety of people and they might not match your interests. In my experience, some of the things you find is there are people that say they want friends who are into gaming, and what they mean is they want someone to play games with. Specifically online games or MMO games or battle royale games, that sort of thing. And I don't like those kinds of games. I don't generally play games on my computer at all, as a matter of fact. Which sort of brings up the problem when you have a hobby like gaming. It's not entirely common, again, especially if you have niche taste in games like I do, that you're necessarily going to find somebody who both has similar interest in games to what you have and has a similar enough personality that you're going to get along well. But by far the most useless piece of advice when it comes to hobbies that people give is they just tell you, get a better hobby, or get a hobby that's going to make you friends. And the reason why this piece of advice is useless is because you don't choose what you enjoy to do. You can't just force yourself to enjoy something that you don't particularly have an interest in. That's not to say you shouldn't look for new experiences and try things you haven't tried before, because you very well might find a hobby that you're interested in. But you can't force it. You can't just tell yourself, I'm going to go get a hobby that other people do that I'm going to make friends with, and then go out there, find some random hobby, start doing it, and expect that that's going to happen. Not only is it a complete shot in the dark, but people's brains don't work that way. There are plenty of people whose hobby is gardening. If you told me to go garden, I'd be lost. I could garden for a year, learn all about how you're supposed to do it, and I probably wouldn't enjoy it any more by that point than I did when I started. You can't just get a hobby. It doesn't work like that. Most people already have their own hobbies. If you don't, I'm not sure what you do with your spare time. And if you haven't been able to make friends through them yet, then either the opportunity just hasn't presented itself yet, or it's not going to. And then sometimes people will say things like, join social clubs, or join social groups, or find groups in your area that have to do with your hobby. And that's a great piece of advice if your area has groups like that, and if people go to them. You can see where I'm going with this, right? That doesn't apply to everyone. It doesn't apply to me. I live in a city that has very few social groups at all, and the ones that it has have nothing to do with anything that I'm remotely interested in. See, that's sort of the thing about having hobbies or making friends or meeting people or whatever. It's not something you can force. It's something that has to happen naturally, right? My interest in old phones, I didn't force that. I didn't decide one day I'm interested in old phones because that sounds cool. It happened naturally. It happened gradually. I walked around with an old phone for years, not being interested in other old phones at all, and then one day developed it out of curiosity. If you think to any of the friends that you've ever made and had lasting connections with, I'll almost guarantee you it didn't happen because you forced yourself to try and make it happen. It probably happened naturally. Probably just happened because you and that person ended up under a circumstance together where you interacted, and the interaction naturally went well enough that the relationship and the correspondence continued after that. So many comments that say things like, change your hair, change the way you dress, change the way you decorate your room. How is that helpful? I'm not going to completely reinvent who I am just to appeal to other people, and neither should you. That's not a good way to make friends. That's a terrible way to make friends. Because if you do that, you're just going to be unhappy, pretending to be somebody who you're really not, depriving yourself of doing the things you actually enjoy, and being who you are. And any friendship or relationship that's built off of that is going to be shallow and fake. Like, I could just walk around wearing t-shirts with my favorite band's name on it, or however normal people dress, take down all the fun and interesting decorations with characters I like and replace it with boring, plain sheets. And I'm sure if I did that, I'd appeal to many of the people in the comments telling me that my room looks childish. But the fact of the matter is, I care much more about being happy with myself than I do about their opinion of me. And you should too. Maybe that means that those people and people like that are never going to be friends with me, but people like that were never going to be friends with me to begin with, because they saw what I was, and they didn't like it. I don't expect to be paraded with compliments for being a special snowflake that wears gloves at an abnormal time of year. It's just something I do because it makes me more comfortable. It's a personal choice. Like, I'm a vegetarian, right? I do that because personally I prefer to be a vegetarian. I'm not going to go out and tell other people that they have to be vegetarian, that they have to stop eating meat, and that they're a bad person if they do so. Because that would be stupid. That's how most people live. I'm not going to tell them to change their ways because it would make me happy, which it wouldn't really. I don't care. Like I said, it's a personal choice. But I'm just using this as an analogy, right? And I did sort of strongly feel the need to address that in this video, not only because it was bothering me, but because it bothers me that somebody who comes to this video and resonates with it might listen to that advice, or take that advice thinking that it's good advice. You should never have to sacrifice your individuality to get along with other people. If you have to do that, you're not really getting along with other people, you're just coexisting with other people. Anyways, I've probably talked about this for too long. Back to the main point of the video. Yeah, hobbies. Having hobbies is very normal and very healthy, and you should have hobbies, don't get me wrong. I think everyone should have hobbies. I think most people probably already do have at least some hobbies or things they're interested in. You know what my hobbies look like is I like old technology. I like bright, contrasting colors, as you can probably tell by the way I dress and the way my room looks. I like collecting media. I like playing games. I like talking about games and learning about their history and even developing them myself. In fact, in general, I really like learning about things I'm interested in. The vast majority of my YouTube watching, ever since I was a teenager, is just learning about things I'm interested in and the history of them, like old computers or video games or specific game developers, you know. To be clear, I'm not saying that getting a hobby is a bad thing or that it's bad advice, but I'm willing to almost guarantee that most people who receive the advice, go get a hobby, go get a social hobby, and you'll just make friends that way. Most people who have received that advice either probably have tried that already and it didn't work, or have heard that advice and understand why it's not going to work. Indulging in your hobbies with other people is great. It's fantastic. You know, I'd personally love if I had somebody that was interested in really old, cheap Wii games that would just come over and play them with me. You know, that would be fantastic. I'd love to have a friend like that. But, you know, people like that don't just grow on trees, especially when it comes to trying to make friends that are actually near you and in your area and not just random strangers over the internet. I would be curious to hear if any of you have niche hobbies, or really just to hear what your hobbies are in general, and if you've made friends that way or if you haven't. And again, I will read every comment. Every comment I'll read. I'll try to respond to every comment I get. The only time I won't respond to a comment is if I just don't really have much to say in response. I read every comment, and I'm so interested. I'm so interested in, you know, discussing all this. It's a refresher. It's a breath of fresh air that I guess these comment sections can sort of be social settings in and of themselves, where we can talk with each other and share experiences and share advice and whatnot. Even if you have opposing views, I'm interested to hear you reason them. I think my main problem with, you know, unhelpful advice is when people just say things, usually after not even listening to what you had to say things that they basically already believe is true and either hasn't put to the test or just believe is true because it worked out for them. Don't take into account that, in fact, people are different and different things are going to work for different people, and that just because something is easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for everybody else. But yeah, I'm going to try to make more YouTube videos like this because I'm really just blown away by the response that the last one got, and I really love hearing your thoughts and reading your comments. And let me know if you have any other ideas for YouTube videos I should make. Let me know if you'd be interested in me getting a better camera setup and showing you all of these phones in more detail, because they all have unique features and unique stories behind them. And keep leaving comments. I will read all of them. Oh, and one other thing. You remember video responses? Maybe you don't, because that was pretty far in the past, even a little before my time. But basically the idea is you see a video and you record your own video responding to it. I think that's a neat idea. And if any of you make videos like that to any of the videos I make, I will definitely watch them and respond to them. Feel free to post one and post the link to it in the comments, and I'll watch them. Just wanted to put that out there. I think it would be really neat to all talk with each other with actual videos, because I think you can convey a lot more that way than you can with just writing comments. Anyways, just a random thought I thought I'd tack on to the end there.